Hello, and happy marvelous Monday, everybody. I hope that you are well. Thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you for tuning in live, and thank you for watching the replay. Hello out there. I see you on Facebook. I'm live on LinkedIn, and I am live on YouTube. And today's segment is all about creating a win-win rental agreement. This segment is for landlords as well as tenants. If you know someone who is thinking about becoming a landlord or a tenant, please tell them to tune in right now. I am Carissa Spann, the landlord and tenant expert. This is what I do each and every Monday. I'm live at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, just sharing information for landlords, tenants, as well as the entire rental agreement. I do want to give this disclaimer that information I share on my channels, on my platforms, are information that I'm sharing. Is not legal advice. They are definitely the industry's best tips and practices. And today's segment is a follow-up from last week about the rental lease agreement. All right. If you have comments, if you have remarks or observations, please throw it in the comment section. Let me know if you can hear me okay. I definitely want to answer your questions. I definitely want to get your feedback. So don't be a stranger. Don't be afraid to show me some love in the comment section. So I have a lot of information to share because, again, this is part 2. This is a recap and a continuation from last week. So if you did not catch me live, please go to that YouTube channel, watch that replay. And if you have not already subscribed to that YouTube channel, there you can find me at Landlord Life. Life is spelled with a Y. So I'm going to get straight into the conversation today. I do ask that, again, questions, comments, remarks, or observations, throw it in the comment section. Is that all right? All right. So I have a lot of information to share because I got a lot of feedback from yesterday. I got a lot of emails and some of you inboxed me, and I thought it would be fitting to come back and answer those questions live because I'm sure that perhaps others who are watching live, or maybe they're going to watch the replay later, may have some of those same questions. And so I am going to get straight into it. So when we are talking about a rental lease agreement, one of the things that I always share is this when I'm talking to landlords or tenants. Think of a rental agreement, a landlord and tenant relationship, pretty similar to a relationship or marriage. You want to get to know and understand who you're going to be conducting business with. So as a tenant, you want to ask questions of landlords and owners or property managers before you sign on that dotted line. And if you are an owner, a property manager, or a landlord, you also should have a process in place by where you are understanding, you're asking the right questions to know who your potential tenant is going to be. And so there is a way to make sure that it is a win-win for both parties. We want to make sure that we are fair, going straight down that aisle. All right. Fair housing laws are in place. I do want to just plug this in. Fair housing laws are in place to prevent discrimination. Now, just depending on where that rental property is, that will determine what the laws are. Because from one jurisdiction to the next, I'm sure many of you already know this, you've heard me say it over and over again. Well, guess what? I'm going to say it again because I want someone who is tuning in for the first time to know and understand it. You should always know what the laws are where that rental property is. I have viewers who are tuned in from Florida to South Carolina to New York to Midwest, and the laws are very different. They may be similar. It may have some of the same protections, but the laws will differ. You need to know and understand what they are, both landlords as well as tenants. And so please familiarize yourself with that. So let me get into some tips that I want to share with landlords. I have tips that I also want to share with tenants. So the first is this. I see your comments coming in. Thank you so much. I'm going to come straight to you. So I'm going to give tips for landlords first, and then I'm going to come back and I'm going to share some tips for tenants. And today's segment is all about educating you. I want to make sure that I empower you and engage you. So if I move a little too quickly, don't be afraid in that comment section. Say, okay, Carissa, just slow it down a little bit. Or if you need me to repeat something, just stop me and I will definitely do so. All right, so here are my tips first and foremost for landlords. As a housing professional or as a housing provider, you always want to make sure, and I know that many of you know this, but you always want to make sure that you clearly define the terms and the conditions of that rental lease agreement. You want to specify the payment amount. When is the rent due? So if the rent is due, when is it late? So if the rent is due on the 1st and maybe it's late after the 6th, you want to make sure that it's clearly spelled out in that rental lease agreement. You want to do that to minimize misunderstandings. You definitely don't want a tenant to say, oh, well, I thought the rent was due or would be late after the 7th or the 8th. Well, if it's not in the lease, then there leaves some room for misunderstandings and lots of questions. You want to include the late fees. When is the late fee going to kick in? All right. You want to identify if there is a grace period. So let's talk about the rent due on the 1st, maybe after the 5th, and many of you will extend it to like the 10th, and that's fine if that's your policy, but you just want to clearly identify in that rental lease agreement what those terms and conditions are. All right. So here's the next thing for landlords on today. Whatever your inspection, your maintenance protocol is, whatever the repair protocol is, you want to include that. Now, for some of you, I know that 2025 will bring about a lot of new signed rental lease agreements. So I thought it would be fitting to have this conversation at the beginning of the year. Don't wait until later in the year to start thinking about your rental lease agreement. That's something that you want to do now. And let's just say, for those of you who have units that are fully occupied, now is the time to still look ahead. You don't want to wait until you get a tenant that say, okay, well, Mr. and Mrs. Landlord, has been great. I enjoyed living here, now moving. You want to make sure that you are preparing now. So think about what your protocol is. Think about what your policy is now. If there are any changes that you want to implement when you sign a new rental lease agreement, now is the time to do it. I had a conversation with someone a little earlier, some landlords that I've been working with, and I'm sure they're probably tuning in or may watch the replay. They have questions about reporting late payments to the credit bureau when the tenants don't pay their rent on time. And yes, that is an option. You just want to make sure that you clearly articulate and you include all of these terms in your rental lease agreement. So with the maintenance and repair protocol, who's going to be responsible for the repair? Will you have your tenant to make a co-payment or a maintenance payment up front and then you take care of the rest? Will you provide pest control services? How often will you provide those services? Will you be conducting housing inspections? You can do a quarterly inspection. You can do utility usage inspection. You want to clearly identify what you're going to do, think about it, write it down, and then put it in a rental lease agreement. Now, I want to pause for utility inspection, utility usage inspection. I know some of you may not understand what that means. So let's just say you have a tenant who is responsible for paying that water bill, right? If the water bill is high, and I know that sometimes that water bill can go through the roof for just 1 month. So let's say there is a significant increase in that water bill. You want to get in there and you want to identify or inspect every water source in the property, in the kitchen, in the bathrooms. If there's a basement that has like a sink down there, you want to inspect all water sources in the kitchen. You want to make sure that faucet is not leaking, it's not dripping. You want to look at the pipes. You want to look under the cabinet. You want to flush the toilet. When you flush the toilet, is water seeping out from the base of that toilet? When you turn the shower on in that bathroom, is it dripping? Does that diverter need to be replaced? You want to make sure that whatever you're going to do pertaining to inspections and repairs, that you clearly identify what that is and let the tenant know in that rental lease agreement. You want to clarify timelines for addressing issues. So let's say, for instance, the tenant has a request that you, let's say, replace the refrigerator because it's making a lot of noise. And maybe perhaps the refrigerator is outdated. Let's just say it's been in there for an extended period of time, 5, 10, 15 years, right? And because that may not be an emergency type of situation, you want to identify the timelines by which you are making routine repairs as well as emergency repairs. So if there is an emergency, you want the tenant to know and understand the timeline. If it's going to be a 24-hour, when can they expect to hear from you? As a matter of fact, you also want to include an emergency maintenance number. Let's just be real. We know that situations are going to happen. There will be an emergency, okay? That's just the nature of it. When it comes to rental property, real estate, and property management, things will break, okay? Pipes will break. Things may get lodged in the toilet. There may be a backup. There may be an overflow. We don't know when an emergency is going to happen, but when you put it in your rental lease agreement, it leaves no room for error. It leaves no misunderstandings. That tenant will know that you're going to respond within a certain amount of time. You're going to make repairs within a certain amount of time. All right, so now let me go to my third tip for landlords on today. You want to customize that rental agreement. So last week, someone chimed in about rules and policies, any community rules, any house rules. If there are any questions about guests, how long can tenants have guests? Is it 3 days? Is it 5 days? What about noise disturbance? Do you have a smoking policy at your rental property? You want to clearly identify whatever the terms are and just put it in there. Don't be afraid to look up your options and explore what you can and cannot do, but you always want to make sure that you are not violating the laws. You want to add any specific clauses relevant to your property, whether it's a house, an apartment, a mobile home, a condo, a single family home. You want to include all policies. All right. So that's for landlords. Now, I told you I have some tips for tenants. So let me go to my comment section, and then I'm going to share tips for you as tenants. Good evening, Dr. Baker. Thank you so much for tuning in, beautiful. All right. So let me get into my tips for tenants. All right. If you are a tenant, this is for you. If you have questions, don't be afraid. Throw it in the comment section so that I can answer your questions. I do have some questions that I'm going to cover on today. But as a tenant, here's what I want you to know. You should always check for transparency when it comes to costs. You want to confirm however much you have to pay for that security deposit. If there are any move-in fees, You want to know if there are um, any any and all fees that are applicable to you living at that property. Do you have to pay for trash? Do you have to pay for utilities? You want to know what all the fees are, because a lot of times what some landlords are doing are adding extra fees, and the government is starting to crack down on what is called junk fees. So you definitely want to know and understand what that is. As a tenant, I always say it is so important to understand your responsibilities. As a tenant, there are going to be times, there are going to be landlords and housing communities where you have a responsibility. You may have to pay utilities in addition to your rent. You may have to pay maintenance costs, right? I mentioned that a little bit earlier. Some landlords will do that. You want to clarify who will be responsible. So please make sure that you read that rental lease agreement before you sign it. And if you have any questions, go ahead and ask your landlord. Here's my third tip for tenants on today. When it comes to protecting your rights, a few minutes ago, I talked about fair housing laws, right? You want to know and understand what your rights are. You want to look at that rental lease agreement. You want to look for clauses about your right to quiet enjoyment and protection against unlawful entry, meaning that a landlord cannot just walk into your rental property. They have to give you advance notice unless there is some sort of an emergency. And you want to verify that the lease aligns, like I said, with housing laws. So if you don't know something and if you have a question as a tenant, do not be afraid to ask your landlord. You want to do that before you move in, because after you sign that rental lease agreement and you move in, you've signed a legally binding document. That is a contract that you have to live with as long as you are at that rental property, regardless if you knew in advance or if you understood all of the terms and the conditions of that rental lease agreement. So that's why it is so important for you to know these things. All right. So creating a win-win rental agreement, it's not just one-sided, it's a two-sided type of situation. So that requires ongoing communication at the application phase. It requires attention to detail and a commitment to fairness from the landlord on behalf of the landlord or the owner. But not just that, but also by tenants. So as a landlord, please know and understand that yes, while you should have a comprehensive lease that protects you and that rental property, you want to make sure that it's also a positive experience for your tenant. Because again, it's not just one-sided, and it's a relationship. Some people say, well, Carissa, it's like a partnership, relationship. At the end of the day, it is a ship. You're both on board as a landlord or a tenant, right? So you're coming together and you want to make sure that you gel well together. All right. I promise that you don't want to waste time on disputes and misunderstandings because it wasn't clear what was going to happen, the timeline, the responsibility, who's going to do what, who's on first, who's on second, who's going to make the repair, who's going to pay for the pest control infestation, who's going to pay for all these things, who's going to pay for the excessive utility bills, right? Don't leave room for misunderstanding. So definitely have those conversations in advance. All right, so let me answer a couple of frequently asked questions. I'm going to start with landlords first, which is what I typically do. And then I'm going to answer some frequently asked questions for tenants. So the first question that I have here is a landlord wanted to know, Carissa, what should I include in my rental agreement to protect my rental property? Great question. As I indicated, you want to be clear on the terms of the rent. You want to be clear on maintenance responsibilities. You want to be clear on security deposit handling. If there are any pet policies, if there are any rules for the property, you definitely want to do that. You want to include that in your rental lease agreement. And more importantly, you want to make sure that whatever you include in that rental agreement, that you are in compliance with the local laws. All right, here's a question about handling late rent payments. So one of the things that I always like to do is address late payments consistently. You want to do it consistently because it's sending a message to your tenants that paying your rent late, okay, is something that we know does and it can happen, but it should not be paid late on a regular basis. So you want to address it. You want to be consistent in addressing it. So let's say, for instance, that there's a tenant who has a habitual pattern of paying late each and every month. So you want to address the behavior consistently around the same time of the month. So let's say, for instance, the rent is due on the 1st, and after the 5th, you assess a late fee. Well, you want to make sure that when you send out your, excuse me, when you're sending out your delinquent rent notices, that it's around the same time of the month. You want to make sure those notices are going out consistently and promptly around, excuse me, the same time of the month. So after a certain period of time, if you are sending your tenants to an attorney, you want to make sure that you're doing that consistently around the same time of the month. So in rental communities, apartment buildings and things of that sort, property managers, they have a schedule. They already know, okay, the rent is due on the 1st. Late notices go out on the 10th. They go to the attorney by the 15th. You want to be consistent in your practice. All right. Here's another frequently asked question. Can I evict a tenant if they violate the lease? Yes, you can, but you want to make sure that you are following the laws, the eviction laws. You want to understand whatever that process is. You want to make sure that, number one, you are filing the correct notices. You want to make sure that you document any lease violations and avoid self-help measures like changing the locks. Okay. You cannot change the locks on a rental property unless that tenant has been evicted. Because if you do so, that will be considered a self-help measure. I had a young lady, true story, I had a young lady, she was new in property management. She made a big mistake. She got into a disagreement with the tenant. The tenant told her, listen, I'm moving out. I'll let you know when I'm moving out. So the young lady, the property manager, the housing professional, allegedly, she, for whatever reason, she went in. Not only did she change the locks without taking the tenant to court, but she trashed everything in the apartment. That was a big no-no. That was a huge and a costly mistake. This is one of the reasons why every Monday I'm live right here, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube, sharing all this information to minimize these type of mistakes from happening in 2025. All right. Someone asked, how often should I inspect my property? That is a great question. Thank you for that. You want to conduct an inspection. I know that some of you will do housing inspections once a year, and that's fine, but I would suggest to increase that maybe quarterly, because once a year, and just depending on your capacity to get it done, let me just say that, because in large rental communities where maybe you don't have the staff, maybe you don't have help to conduct those housing inspections, it may be a little bit challenging to have those things completed timely. But I would definitely say you want to inspect those rental properties not less than once a year. But you also want to provide your tenants with proper notice. And when you're conducting housing inspections, that is the best time to address any maintenance issues that you see. I would encourage you to implement the see something, say something campaign. So let's say, for instance, you go into a rental property and trash is everywhere. Dishes are just piled up. Roaches are crawling everywhere, right? There are bottles all over the floor. There is just evidence of so much stuff going on in rental property, right? You want to address those things because here it is. Sometimes people will do things because either they don't know or because they don't care. And maybe perhaps, and I know that some of you are like, well, Carissa, common sense is just common sense, right? No, common sense is not so common for everybody. Believe it or not, everybody has not had a lesson on how to keep and maintain their rental home. All right. All tenants are not created equally. All tenants have not been given instructions or advice or have learned how to keep their rental home clean. Listen, I've shared on previous lives where I've gone into rental properties, maybe to do an inspection or what have you. And anytime that I'm conducting a housing inspection, I'm usually prepared, right? I'm usually in comfortable clothing. And if I see something, I say something. I have gone as far as showing a mother how to clean the tub, how to clean the walls, so she can teach her kids how to do that. And I know that sometimes people don't really understand the importance of just educating tenants. So definitely implement that see something, say something campaign. All right. What to do? What do I do? Sorry about that. What do I do if my tenant damages the property? That's a question that I get all the time. Almost every week, people are contacting me. Well, Carissa, my tenant damaged the property. There are holes in the wall. There are body holes everywhere. Now, a body hole, for those of you who don't know, a body hole is simply this. Maybe there was a fight, a physical altercation, and somebody threw someone else through a wall. So when you think about a body hole, it's a large hole where someone went through the wall, right? You want to discuss that. You want to discuss it with the tenant. When you see it, when you're made aware of it, you want to also let that tenant know that any damage to the rental property could be deducted from their security deposit if they paid that security deposit. All right. Now, if the cost exceeds that security deposit, you want to discuss repayment options, or you could also consider legal action. All right. Any questions here before I move on with tenants? Because I want to make sure that, like I said, if I have to slow down, I would definitely do so. All right. If not, I'm going to keep going. So here are some questions that I've gotten a lot from tenants. All right. Here's the first one. What should I look for in a rental agreement before signing the lease? Great question. You want to make sure that the lease, it is clear. It includes details and information about the rent, the deposit terms, how much the security deposit is, when will that security deposit be returned, right? You want to know those things. Now, usually a security deposit, just depending on the jurisdiction, should be returned within 30 days. But you have to know what the laws are in that jurisdiction. Because for one area, returning the security deposit might be 30 days. In another place or another jurisdiction, state, city, if you will, it may be 45 days. So you want to know and make sure that it's clearly identified in that rental lease agreement. Maintenance responsibilities. You want to definitely know that before signing that lease, because let's say as a tenant, you move into a rental property, you didn't read the lease in advance, and you didn't know that you have to pay $750, and then anything above that, the owner will take care of, right? And so that's why you want to read it, and you want to ask about any unclear terms, conditions, and clauses. All right, so here is another frequently asked question by tenants or from tenants. Can my landlord raise my rent during the lease term? No, landlords cannot raise the rent in the middle of your initial lease term unless your agreement includes some sort of clause allowing them to do so, and it should be in accordance with the law. So rent increases are typically applied at lease renewal after that first year or after that initial lease term is up. Now, all lease terms may not be 12 months. It may be a 3-month, it could be a 6, 9, 12, 24 months. So after that initial lease term is up, that's when the landlord can and should increase that rent. So great question there. Here's another question. What do I do if my landlord is not making necessary repairs? Listen, if you've been tuned in, if you followed me, if you watched some of my replays on that YouTube channel, you've seen some of the consequences. You've seen what happens when landlords don't make repairs. As a tenant, you do have rights. So you want to, first of all, notify that landlord in writing. So if you call your landlord, I would still say follow up in writing. It could be a text message. It could be an email. You want to keep a record of it, and you want to make sure that you are documenting whatever your requests are. I know that as a housing professional, I've been in the industry for well over 20 something years. I have seen several property managers who are so inundated with the nuances of managing rental property. Sometimes they get burned out. Sometimes there's this property manager fatigue, and perhaps they forget to follow up on maintenance requests. Now, is it your responsibility as a tenant to remind your landlord that repairs are needed? Absolutely not. So you definitely want to document it. And if they are not following up, then give them a call. Hey, Mr. and Mrs. Landlord, a few days ago, I asked if you can repair my refrigerator or repair my stove. And I'm just wondering if someone is still coming out, right? So follow up, but make sure that you are documenting every complaint, every attempt to get those repairs completed. All right. And here's another frequently asked questions. One of my frequently asked questions by tenants. Can my landlord enter my home without notice? Well, I think I've already answered that. Landlords must provide advance notice. Usually it's 24 to 48 hours unless there is an emergency. Now, depending on the state law, all right, you want to know and understand when a landlord can come in. Because like I said, it could be 24 hours in, let's just say, Vermont. In DC, it's 48 hours. And so you want to know what the laws are. Okay. Now, if it's an emergency, then your landlord can enter. So let's say you live in an apartment building. The emergency is not necessarily in your apartment, but let's just say that there's a pipe that bursts and water is just flooding the apartment building. So your landlord may need to enter, although they have not given you advance notice, right? So in cases of an emergency, they will not be able to give advance notice because they should just be able to come in to take care or to ascertain whatever the nature of the emergency may potentially be. Here's another question that I have, frequently asked question. What happens to my security deposit after I move out? Well, by law, your landlord must return your security deposit. And if they are going to deduct for any reason, they are to provide you with a detailed list of what needs to be done, why they are deducting it, and the time frame by which they are going to return whatever is remaining. All right, so I know that I shared a lot today. I shared tips for landlords. I shared tips for tenants. But if you are a landlord or if you have a tenant, let me know in the comment section. What are some other things that are important to you, or what do you think should be important for landlords and tenants to know when it comes to creating a win-win rental lease agreement? And it doesn't matter where the rental property is. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section. Hello. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I am fantastic and amazing. Thank you so much for asking. All right. Here is your comment. I am going through tenant union meeting every day. My building getting renovated in my house, but it's getting delayed. My house was flooded June 1st. Is this a violation against my old management? That's a great question. Now, what I would like to know is, has there been a change of management? Yes, and Happy New Year to you too. Thank you so much. So, do you have a new property manager? If your unit, so your rental unit was flooded in June, have they started to make repairs? Because that's some time ago. So I would want to know, before answering your question, number one, is there a change of management? Because sometimes a new property manager, a new management can come in and they may not be aware of the issues. That's not to excuse the owners from making the necessary repairs, right? But I'm just interested to know as to whether or not there's been new management, change of management, new property manager. Have they already started repairs? Because if your home, your rental home flooded in June, they should have started to make repairs. We're in January. So if your home flooded in June and they've not completed the repairs, that would be extremely concerning for me. So let me know in the comments section, if you will, if that's your situation. And then also let me know, or you can email me which jurisdiction you are in, and perhaps I can try to get you some help. So if you can answer those questions for me, I would greatly appreciate that. Now, here's one of the things, and I can appreciate that. Let me put this back up on the screen. As pertains to a tenant union meeting, I strongly recommend in apartment communities that tenants form some sort of tenant association, because there are advocates, there are people who can help you and know the laws a lot better than you may know the laws. There are a lot of protections that are in place. And so I'm happy to hear that you are at the very least attending these meetings. Here's your comment. Yes, it's been a change of new management. The old landlord still working my building. The new management is aware of my repairs. The new management is not doing any renovations until they get 1 million. Wait, what? They're not doing repairs until they get $1 million? Or is it that the repairs are going to cost $1 million? Because that would be a little troubling to me that they're not going to do anything. Well, perhaps they don't have the money. Nonetheless, as a tenant, that is not your issue. So I would strongly recommend, I don't know which jurisdiction you live in. Please email me. I'm getting ready to provide my email address, and I will try to get you to resources available in your area that can potentially help you. So that is my email address there at the bottom of the screen, info@landlordlife.com. Please email me. All right. I want to see how I can help you, because that is an issue. If there is some sort of mold going on in your rental home, those are things that would be, number one, a red flag for me. That would be a big question, because when it comes to water, if they have not done anything, sometimes you don't know where mold is growing. You can't always smell mold, right? You don't know that perhaps mold is growing or has grown under the carpet, if there is carpet, right? Sometimes these are things that you just don't know. And so don't take it for granted. Please email me, and I will do what I can and try to get you connected to the right place and resources that can help you in your situation. So thank you for your questions. Thank you for showing up today. I shared a lot of information. Let me do a recap of what I shared today. I promised that I was going to educate you. I was going to empower you, and engage you. And so I do hope that this was encouraging. But as a landlord, the tips that I shared for landlords was to clearly define the terms of that rental lease agreement, to specify the schedule, the rent, when it's due, when it's late. If you are reporting late payments to the credit bureaus, which you absolutely can, but you want to notify the tenant either in advance, or if you're in the middle of a lease term, or let's just say the tenant has been there, then all of a sudden you've heard me say that you can report it. You don't have to wait until they move out to report it to a credit bureau, right? You just want to notify the tenant. Also gave the importance and emphasize that you should include a maintenance schedule, a repair protocol. I also share for landlords the importance of customizing that lease agreement. Don't wait until the tenant moves out. It's 2025. Start doing those things now. And that way, whenever the tenant moves out, whether it's this year, whenever, you already have something in place. And just over time, just kind of think about what you want to change, right? You can get information, you can get education, the knowledge that I share, write those things down, save it in your notes somewhere, put it in a rental lease agreement, because things will change. And you want to always improve your policies, your process, your procedures for your rental business. All right. So for tenants, I shared how important it is for them to check for transparency in costs. Know whatever the fees are to move in. If there's a security deposit, if it's a move-in fee, if it's a pet deposit, if it's a monthly pet fee, right? Be clear on what the terms are so that you know what the cost is. If you have to pay utilities, if you have to pay for trash, you need to know and be clear about whatever you have to pay. Because even if you don't know, even if you don't understand, or let's just say worst case scenario, you flat out didn't read that lease agreement in advance, you still have to pay it if that's what you sign. Because again, it is a legally binding document. And then the third and final tip that I shared for tenants was to protect your rights. You want to make sure that you understand what you are entitled to receive, what a landlord is supposed to do. You also should know your responsibilities as a tenant. Okay, so I do hope that helps. I shared a lot in a short period of time on today. All right, let me come back to you. The renovations are getting delayed. We are doing demand letters with the tenant union people. I don't know yet about the renovation. It's getting announced, but I don't know. I would suggest to follow up with the landlord, with the property manager. Ask those questions in writing. Send an email or write a letter inquiring about the repairs, especially if they are urgent, if they are life-threatening. If the repairs are not completed, can you still live in your rental home, whether it's a house or an apartment? So those are the questions that you want to ask. Ask the timeline by which they're going to make the repairs. And if that's not being done, you can always contact a local housing inspection office if one is available where you reside. So I do hope that helps. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for those of you who are watching a replay. I'm Carissa Spann, the landlord and tenant expert. This is what I do every Monday at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'm live on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. And if you have not already subscribed to my YouTube channel, why not go and subscribe to my YouTube channel? Go right now. Go subscribe to my YouTube channel. There you can find me, Landlord Life. Okay, my time is up. I thank you for yours. Let me share my email address one last time in case you need to email me. All right. If you have questions, if you have topics that you would like for me to cover in the upcoming weeks or anytime throughout this year, please email me. Let me know. Let me know what are some topics or subject matters that are important to you, whether you're a landlord or a tenant, or you just have burning questions about landlord and tenant matters. All right. Thank you so much for joining me today. I, again, hope that you found this information and discussion helpful. I hope that you'll join me next week right here, Facebook, LinkedIn, or YouTube. Now, for those of you who are landlords, in the upcoming week, I'm going to invite you to join me. I do have some live events coming up, and I am going to be opening up my landlord master strategy program. So for landlords who desire more help, that is a 6-week opportunity to work with me, whether it's one-on-one or in a group setting. I'm excited to bring that back online for 2025. Many of you have asked about it, and it is back. So I'm going to share that date. I'm going to share more information as well as the website. Hey, Moose, thank you so much for joining me, big brother. Happy New Year to you as well. All right, guys, again, my time is up. I thank you for yours. I look forward to seeing you all next week right here, same platform, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'm Carissa Span, and it has been a fantastic pleasure having you join me today. Bye for now.